We're starting with possibly the most famous extinct plant in history, and it disappeared over 2,000 years ago. Silphium was a flowering plant that grew exclusively along a small coastal strip of what is now Libya and the ancient city-state of Cyrene, and it was, without exaggeration, one of the most valuable substances in the ancient world. And I mean valuable, like Cyrene literally put this plant on their coins. That's how important it was. You know a plant has made it when it becomes legal tender. So what was so special about it? Well, silphium was essentially everything. It was used as a seasoning that ancient Romans and Greeks described as irreplaceable, the kind of flavor you couldn't substitute or replicate no matter how hard you tried. It was also used medicinally, as a treatment for coughs, fevers, digestive problems, warts, and a bunch of other things. Ancient writers described it as a cure for basically whatever was wrong with you, which is either impressive or just ancient people being dramatic. Honestly, probably both. Oh, and it was also used as contraceptive. Yup, ancient birth control, possibly taken as a tea or extract. Some researchers actually think the heart shape we still use today to represent love might have originally been a drawing of the silphium seed, which is, depending on your perspective, either very romantic or extremely awkward. Make of that what you will. The problem was silphium only grew in one specific place, in one specific climate, with one specific soil type, and it couldn't be cultivated anywhere else, no matter how many times people tried. And people tried a lot. The Romans were desperate for this stuff and would have paid literally anything for a reliable supply, but silphium refused to cooperate. And because demand was absolutely insane, they just kept harvesting more and more of the wild plants until eventually there were none left. The last recorded stalk of silphium was reportedly given to the Roman Emperor Nero as a curiosity sometime around 54 CE. He ate it, because of course he did. Gone. Forever. Because it tasted good. Moving on to something slightly less ancient and slightly more heartbreaking, the paradise nut tree, also known as Lesithis zabucayo, isn't fully extinct, but certain wild populations were devastated so severely that they might as well be. And the story of why is almost embarrassingly simple. The paradise nut is, by most accounts, significantly more delicious than the Brazil nut, which is already pretty good. People who've eaten them describe the flavor as richer, creamier, more complex. Naturally, the moment Europeans encountered this thing in South America, they lost their minds over it. The nuts are also much harder to harvest than Brazil nuts because the tree is extraordinarily picky about where and how it grows, and it depends on very specific pollinators, particular species of bees that only exist in undisturbed rainforest. The moment you mess with the habitat, the bees leave, the tree stops reproducing, and that's that. We messed with the habitat extensively. By the time anyone thought to say, hey, maybe we should be careful with this, the wild populations in many areas had already collapsed. You can still find paradise nuts occasionally from cultivated sources, but the wild tree that produced them in abundance, largely gone from huge swaths of its original range. All because it was too delicious. The tree's fatal flaw was simply that humans found it tasty, and that's a sentence that should make all of us feel at least a little bit guilty. This one comes from the tiny island of Rodrigues in the Indian Ocean, and it's a story that starts with what might be the loneliest plant in modern history. Café Marron, or Remismania rodrigues-ruensis, is a small flowering shrub that was considered completely extinct for decades. And then, in 1980, a schoolboy on the island found a single surviving specimen growing near an old building. One plant, that was it. The entire species was one individual plant on an island in the middle of the Indian Ocean. How did it get this way? The usual story. Habitat destruction, invasive species, and overharvesting. The plant had been used locally for its bark, which was believed to have medicinal properties as a treatment for venereal diseases. Whether or not it actually worked is frankly beside the point, because the harvesting continued until the plant was essentially gone. The good news is, and we don't always get good news on this list, is that botanists from Kew Gardens in London spent years trying to propagate the surviving plant through cuttings and eventually succeeded. There are now multiple specimens in cultivation, and efforts are underway to reintroduce it to Rodriguez. The bad news is, reproducing a plant from a single genetic individual means the entire surviving population is essentially clones of one tree, which creates its own set of problems for long-term survival. So it's alive, technically, but it's alive the way you're alive after a really terrible week where everything went wrong and you're just sort of sitting there holding on by a thread. We've all been there. The island of St. Helena? Yes, the same island where Napoleon was exiled, because history loves to put multiple interesting things in the same location, was once covered in a remarkable native forest. And one of the most distinctive trees in that forest was the St. Helena olive, Nesiota elliptica, which, despite the name, was not actually related to the olive trees you're thinking of. It was a small, flowering tree with lovely white flowers, endemic to the island, meaning it grew absolutely nowhere else on Earth. And when European settlers arrived on St. Helena starting in the 1500s, they brought goats. And then more goats. And then some more goats, just for good measure. Those goats ate everything. Combined with widespread deforestation for timber and fuel, the native forest of St. Helena was devastated over the following centuries, and the St. Helena olive, adjective restricted to one small island, just couldn't keep up. The last wild individual died in 1994. The last cultivated specimen died in 2003, and that was it. Officially, completely, and irreversibly extinct. Gone from a planet it had called home for millions of years, done in by a combination of introduced livestock and colonial timber demands. Napoleon probably didn't even notice the trees, which somehow makes it worse.